The word reconnaissance gains its name from a military-based technique of surveying a region to locate weak spots or threats. Reconnaissance attacks are used by cybercriminals as a way of gathering information about the endpoint or affected systems, or to locate accessible services and assets of the attacker's target. Social network sites, spyware, adware, and Trojan viruses are just a few of the known recon attack vectors. Through this type of an attack, the attacker aims to gain as much information as possible about a target and use that information to discover vulnerabilities that can be used later to exploit the system. In general, these attacks don't cause damage, but are used as a means of information gathering. Common techniques that are used for recon attacks include war driving, port scanning, and password cracking. And there are specific tools that an attacker will use. One of the most widely known tools for performing recon is Nmap. And we'll take a look at Nmap in this topic section here. Paratrace is another one, OpenVAS is another, as well as the Nessus vulnerability testing tool. Now, attackers use port scanners with the goal of identifying open ports. And Nmap, again, is one of the most commonly used tools in this area. Well, once an attacker has a list of open ports, they can then research and then target specific vulnerabilities in an attempt to exploit the system. Oftentimes, the exploits will be launched using the Metasploit tool. Now, ethical hackers use this tool for vulnerability scanning and penetration testing purposes with the reason of securing their applications and websites and so on. However, black hat hackers or attackers, the bad guys, they do the same thing with this tool. However, they have malicious intentions. We need to keep in mind that Wi-Fi networks that have poor security features or client computers that have poor security features implemented are a major target of attacks. Wireless networks that use WEP as their security method are often more prone to attacks as well that can then be used for recon. Now, end users should be properly trained so that they can help to mitigate the chances of them being unwitting participants in a recon attack. I recall watching a show years ago that had an ethical hacking firm that gained access to a financial institution by calling a central office and indicating that they were from the IT department and having the central office technician read the password that was taped to the console of the router. An office environment can also be a recon attack vector, as passwords are often posted on cubicle walls. Any would-be attacker could walk through an office using a cell phone camera to capture these bits of information and then, of course, use it at a later time. Also, we need to think about our applications that are used on the network. These should be carefully vetted by our IT department to make sure that they don't have ports that accept incoming connections that could possibly be of concern. Oftentimes, peer-to-peer applications are used as an attack vector, and they allow the scanning of a host machine and give away a little more information than they should. And this is all valuable intelligence that an attacker would love to gain about a target system. Now, there are types of recon attacks that you need to be aware of. There are passive recon attacks and active recon attacks. In a passive recon attack, the attacker is going to listen on the network by possibly capturing packets. That can be done using Wireshark and a wireless network card. You can get wireless cards that scan multiple channels and listen and simply capture packets there. Keyloggers are also a method that are used to passively track keystrokes, collect passwords, and then that information can be fed back to the would-be hacker. There are also active attacks. Active attacks involve using applications like Nmap, Nessus, or OpenVAS. In this type of attack, the attacker is going to communicate in some way with the target system. And the idea here is that they want to collect information about the vulnerabilities that are there. So you can imagine the topology that we see here has an attacker device connected via the network somehow to a server device. Using, for example, Nmap, a string command can be issued that instructs the Nmap application to send packets to the target server. Now, perhaps that target server is listening on several ports, like port 80, port 443, port 25, port 53. Whatever services that might be running on that device have listening ports. Well, when Nmap scans that device and the server reports back that all these ports are open, this attacker can now maintain a list of ports and then research those ports for potential vulnerabilities. Using that list of potential vulnerabilities might just lead to an exploit of the system. Now, recon attacks can be mitigated by implementing tight security controls on any internet-connected system, using SSH for management so that passwords can't be captured, and so that the information that's being passed in the session cannot be seen. We know that SSH uses encryption. Also, on your network devices, it's advisable to use obscure device names rather than a device name that gives away too much information. So you think of protocols like the Cisco Discovery Protocol. If, for example, an attacker were to be connected to the network and receive CDP information, we might not want that attacker to receive a host name of a device that says server switch or data center central switch or something along those lines. So obscure device names will help to obfuscate for us. We also want to, of course, use strong encryption, VLANs for isolation, and even private VLANs can be used in our networks to help mitigate recon attacks. In a private VLAN, we have multiple users that are all connected to the same main VLAN. Let's say they're all part of VLAN 5, but each port is isolated from one another. Now, there is what's known as a promiscuous port, and that promiscuous port would lead to the default gateway, so any of the users, whether it be A, B, or C, they could talk to that promiscuous port, and that promiscuous port can return traffic to any of them. However, being assigned to the isolated port would disallow communication between users of that port. So user A, who's part of VLAN 5 but on the isolated port, couldn't run an Nmap scan against host B, who's also in VLAN 5. So private VLANs or switch port protected configured ports can all help us in mitigating recon attacks. It's also advisable to implement IDS and IPS technologies so that they can identify when scans are happening. And also the use of network address translation or port address translation can be a means of mitigating recon attacks, as a single IP address might be used by multiple devices for network connectivity. So a scan of that single IP address doesn't necessarily give away the internal topology. Again, something that would be nice for an attacker to have so that they can map out the network. That's good recon. And again, going back to that military term, that's exactly what recon was used for, to identify the lay of the land, to figure out what everything looks like, and then target the weak spots. So NAT can kind of hide that for us. Let's look at a quick example here of an Nmap scan. Now, what's happening here is we are on a Kali Linux machine, and that Kali Linux machine has entered the command nmap-vsn 192.168.80.131. Now, that host that's running on that IP address is running the Metasploitable operating system, which is a known vulnerable Linux operating system that's used for penetration testing. It's a good way for us to test against our own device, and then we don't have to worry about breaking any laws or anything like that. So in this case, we've run a scan on that Metasploitable image that is running at 192.168.80.131, and we can see that Nmap returned quite a few ports that are open, and of interest here, port 21, which is FTP. That's not secure. It's clear text. We have port 23, Telnet's open. We have HTTP port 80 that's open, and several others. And so now as an attacker, I can gather up this information, start looking for vulnerabilities. And another thing I could do with Nmap here is I could run a scan to guess the operating system. Well, in this case, we can see that the MAC address here gave us away. It says that it's a VMware-based image, but nothing here in this output says that it's a Linux device. But of course, we could run a scan and do some OS fingerprinting. Once we have that information, now we can start to research these ports on a particular operating system, and we can target the device for attack.